Greetings adventurers, and welcome to the Loot Goblin Marketplace. Not everyone plays the game the same way, so it's always important to have that moment of self-reflection to determine whether or not the other player's actions at the game table are really worth getting into a screaming match over. Occasional friction between the party members and the Dungeon Master isn't ideal, but when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game for months together, people are bound to want to play certain scenarios in different ways, and that can cause arguments. Friction by itself isn't an issue. It's the players who persistently cause friction and will gladly double down instead of trying to find compromises that end up being labeled as problem players. The question isn't if friction will happen, but instead when does it become enough friction where you have to finally address it. Today's story is from lootgoblinstories@gmail.com and covers an individual who was a family member's suggestion to join the campaign, and as a result turned a good campaign into an annoying one. They go by Kirk of the Jungle, and the title is Player Left the Campaign, but I think it's for the best. Hey kid, want to try some gamer subs? You can now get free samples anywhere in the world and try the most delicious 0-calorie energy powder in the game when you use code LootGoblin. Each sample sent out gets me one step closer to my quest to get a flavor that tastes suspiciously like Dr. Pepper. If you end up liking those free samples and want to purchase some gamer subs, make sure to use the link in the description or use my code to get 10% off your entire order. Anyways, back to the video. In 2023, I formed a long-term family D&D group with my younger brother, my older sister, and her husband. For the sake of privacy, I'll continue to refer to them as bro, sis, and bro-in-law, respectively. We had a pretty good setup since bro and I share an apartment and we host all our game days. That made it easier to schedule sessions, and sis and bro-in-law were good at communication. If something came up and they couldn't make it, we would postpone it for next week. We would also take breaks from Dungeons & Dragons over the summer since bro works at a summer camp at the time. The four of us decided to have our sessions one day on the weekend. We would also rotate who would be the Dungeon Master, with each Dungeon Master running a different campaign. This resulted in us having 3 separate campaigns going, with brother-in-law running Horde of the Dragon Queen and my brother running a Strixhaven campaign, while sis preferred being exclusively a player. Then there was me, who had recently acquired Keys from the Golden Vault, a collection of one-shots revolving around heist adventures. I decided to get experimental with my first attempt at DMing for our group by running an episodic campaign using those one-shots. Probably not something one should do for every one-shot collection book. The others were also on board with the idea and were enthusiastic with making their characters. Since this was my first campaign, I requested everyone keep backstories simple and straightforward. My only other ask was to include why the Golden Vault would want to recruit their characters, since I was portraying them as a sort of Robin Hood kind of guild. Just think of something that your character could have done in the past that a first level character could reasonably accomplish, I told them. Also, make sure that your characters would be good at sneaking around, but capable of defending themselves if push comes to shove. Other than that, the sky's the limit. Sis has never gotten a chance to play a rogue before, so she rolled up a Shattered Kai elf, a thief designed primarily for charisma-focused roleplay, who had conned a snobby noble out of his money to help renovate an orphanage. I can't remember all the specifics for bro-in-law off the top of my head, but he made a halfling cleric who followed a goddess of luck and had spells prepared randomly for every session. Finally, bro decided to think outside the box and create a kobold paladin who was chaotic good and followed the oath of the ancients. He also requested letting him be more of a dexterity build and have strength as his dump stat, which I approved. We had session 0 where their characters met their Golden Vault handler at an original tavern I had made up, and it was off to the races. To this day, I have no regrets greenlighting this party, as they were a fun party to roleplay with, and the 3 players had great chemistry with each other. On top of that, they were also very encouraging to me, telling me to go all out in challenging them. Having the campaign be more episodic also helped me plan and think of different ways to adjust encounters that they told me post-session they didn't see coming, and enjoyed all the more as a result. For example, for their first adventure, they had to steal an egg of an eldritch horror, mistaken for an ancient stone. They have to steal the egg before it hatches and use a gala to their advantage. To test the group's problem-solving skills, I informed them that the gala was reserved for player races in the player's handbook and their variants. They got the message and integrated this fact into their break-in plan. Sis and brother-in-law were like, cool, you and I can go in as guests for the gala, while bro added, alright, while you guys do that, I'll see if I can get a job as new museum staff. I couldn't have been happier with how well they communicated with each other, and how they were able to pull that heist without a hitch. Also, and I'll understand if this gets some raised eyebrows from readers, but one thing I have been doing is including characters that either aid and abet the party for each heist if I thought they fit into the narrative. Most of the time, I used NPCs provided by the module, but I have also used player character ideas of mine every now and then. Well, first of all, if you use NPCs that were included in the module and the players ask for them to come along in the heist, I don't really know if that counts as a DMPC. Obviously, the ones that are your original ideas can become a little bit more of a problem. The only thing that really worries me here is the fact that you use the wording that you included characters if I thought it fit into the narrative. If you're dragging along these NPCs for a heist because you think they're needed and not because the players do, yeah, that can be an issue, but ultimately it is a very small party. Maybe there's a bunch of stuff that needs to go right for the heist to work, so you have like NPCs be these filler roles that just are the getaway driver or other random one-off tasks. That's not really a big deal. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If the players are having fun and the NPCs are doing tasks that they realistically couldn't do themselves, I really don't think there's any harm here. So yeah, I use the NPCs, but I was always careful to keep them at the same level as the party and have them follow their direction if they were helping them with the heist. The exception was a rogue whose personality was inspired by Ada Wong from Resident Evil, so I did my best to have her agenda concealed and be 2 levels above the party, but I let the others know when I would use one of these characters, and in the case of my Ada-inspired rogue, her presence was mainly to provide illustration that the party could encounter characters who would be one step ahead of them, and the party was okay with that. In any case, the campaign's episodic nature made it easy for me to have characters come and go from the story, and I probably won't use DMPCs as often outside of this campaign going forward. I mean, yeah, that's honestly fair. So far, everything has been going super well, right? Well, this is where we dip our pinky toes into the horror genre. I probably took too much time going over the setup for the story, but I do think it was necessary to explain what the party dynamic was like in the beginning before the actual horror began. After the rousing success that was our first session, Sis and brother-in-law told me that they had mentioned their campaign to a friend of theirs at the time, who I will refer to as ex-friend. I had met ex-friend previously a few times, and I was asked by Sis and brother-in-law if I was interested in adding a new player. For our other campaigns, we got other friends playing with us, with others even getting to be a guest character for a single session if they were visiting from out of state. And in the case of this friend, she was very into heist stories, so she sounded like she would be a good fit for the group. With this character in mind, as well as the episodic nature of my campaign, I decided I'm up for it. Just make sure her character fits the same prerequisites I established for your party. Not long after, a few days later, I got ex-friend's proposed character concept, a Kenku bard who stole a boat to give to a fisherman down on his luck. I thought it was a neat idea that fit well with the rest of the established party, and ex-friend was invited to the next session to playtest her character joining the team. Everything seemed smooth sailing as we got through the next 3 adventures in Golden Vault. Along with the 4th adventure, I made to serve as an extension for one of them. Ex-friend seemed like a good and welcome member to the team in the beginning. Her character fit with the party's quirky and unorthodox composition, and she used her bard abilities in a lot of creative ways that contributed to each heist's success. Unfortunately, because we were all having so much fun with the campaign, I didn't immediately pick up on the problems starting to happen in and out of game. While ex-friend was a good player for the most part, she was often overly talkative in and out of character. At first, this didn't seem like an issue, because I know talks like this are bound to happen from time to time. They have happened in other campaigns and in the first session for mine. When this happened with ex-friend though, out-of-game talks would go from lasting a minute at most to anywhere between 3 to 5. Why didn't I pick up on them being a problem right away? I simply told myself it had to do with me needing to work on my ability to get the group back on track, so I didn't realize that ex-friend was also getting on everyone else's nerves to various extents. Where I really should have picked up on the problems ex-friend caused was from the fact that adventurers kept needing to carry over to an additional session due to how much time we would have to play. Keep in mind these are one-shot adventures I'm running, adventures designed to be completed in one session. Of course, I know this isn't a problem by itself. If something like this happened every now and then, I would agree that it's not a big deal. The problem was that this happened with every adventure I had planned, so what should have taken 4 weekend days to complete took twice as long to get through. I should have communicated with the party in general to see if this was upsetting anyone, but since no one spoke up, I told myself I was overthinking things. These things happen sometimes, was my constant reminder. I can't expect every session to end where I would like it to. The other reason I didn't look into whether this was affecting the party dynamic was because I made sure we paused every adventure at a good stopping point, somewhere that would be an easy spot to provide a quick session recap. For example, the last adventure ex-friend participated in, the party had to infiltrate a prison to steal a map from from a high security prisoner. While planning for the session, I discovered that this was the same prison from the Honor Among Thieves movie, so I thought it'll be a fun reference that these adventures take place after the events of the movie. You see, Bros Paladin had subscribed to a newsletter, so I told him that he had read an article how the Aarakocra counselor, who was used by the movie's main characters to escape prison, had retired after being thrown out a window once, and then nearly again a second time, and the rest of the council was looking for a successor to his position. It was meant to be a fun throwaway piece of information. The entire party, however, decided to use that throwaway info as a focal point for planning their heist. In the end, we only got as far as the party arriving at the prison, and I wasn't really ready for them to actually execute the heist for that session. That worked to my advantage at the time because I had 3 weeks to prep for their plan. But just like that, a large contributing factor to why the adventure lasted 2 sessions instead of 1 is because ex-friend was overly talkative, and it took longer than usual to get the story back on track for the party. This was especially problematic because her bard was the one selected to come to the prison disguised as a candidate for the vacant council seat. Since she was talking so much out of character, prepping for the heist took up the entire session. Now, I'm more than willing to admit that I should have been more assertive as a DM, but this was not ex-friend's biggest offense. In between sessions, she would tell me how she was working on developing more of her character's backstory. I was okay with this and agreed she could show me the material she wrote up, and that I would see if I could integrate her notes into the campaign if it fits in. Emphasis on if it fits in. Unfortunately, while I liked what she shared with me, I had a hard time figuring out how to add these new details into the campaign, because much of what she wrote felt out of place in a heist-themed story. I told her as much and said if I was to fit parts of her idea in, I would need time and more creative planning. At first, ex-friends seemed to understand, and I made sure to communicate in between sessions whether I was getting anywhere with her notes. This understanding didn't last long, because when I informed her how I was having a hard time figuring out how to use her backstory the way she was hoping for me to run it, ex-friend got increasingly demanding, and got more and more insistent that I figure something out. Despite the pressure she was putting me under, I reminded her that my efforts weren't for lack of trying, and I hadn't stopped trying. Every time I had this talk though, I felt like I was failing in some way as a dungeon master. You know, I do like when players try to add more to their backstory, but I agree with the author here, sometimes when it's not introduced originally in session 0, it gets harder and harder to include it into the story as time goes on. Obviously, I don't know the exact details of the backstory because they're not included here. Since it is like an episodic campaign and NPCs come and go all the time for one-off missions, I guess there was a way to tie it in there no matter what the backstory is. Honestly though, considering how pushy this player is, doing like a cameo probably wouldn't be good enough for them, and now they would derail the entire session just to make it about them. So I kind of understand the hesitancy to include it in the story until you're ready to have like almost an entire session centered around it. There are players that can be fun enough at the game table, but their personalities kind of suck out all the air in the room, and it feels like no one else, including the dungeon master, really gets to say anything without their approval. You are ultimately the dungeon master, you're allowed to be the first person to put your foot down. Let's see how this resolves. Ultimately, this wouldn't endure for long. Sometime after the prison heist sessions, sis and brother-in-law visited me to tell me that ex-friend wouldn't be joining for the next session. It was then that I learned that ex-friend's demanding behavior wasn't isolated to my campaign, but a common pattern of behavior for her. Sis and brother-in-law knew this and hadn't brought it up to me before. That was because I'd only met ex-friend a few times before we made our core D&D group, and the campaign was the only time I interacted with her regularly, so once every 3 weeks. Not only that, but sis and brother-in-law had been able to handle ex-friend's behavior alright for the most part before now. This time though, ex-friend was demanding that they spend as much time as they could spare with her. Sis and brother-in-law did their best to accommodate ex-friend, but whenever they couldn't, ex-friend got furious with them. This happened at a time when sis and brother-in-law were in the middle of getting ready to move, and even when sis had to have an important surgery. So ex-friend was getting furious at them when they had legitimate reasons for why they couldn't always hang out with her. It got to the point where sis and brother-in-law told ex-friend, hey, I think it might be a good idea for all of us to give each other some space for a while, and then we can all figure out where to go from there when we're ready. According to them, ex-friend's response was, do you just not want to be friends with me anymore? And that was the conversation that ended their friendship. After informing me of this, sister and brother-in-law told me what had happened with ex-friend was in no way my fault, and how I shouldn't blame myself for her behavior. We're the ones who invited her, they reminded me, and if anyone should have picked up on how she was acting, it should have been us, not you. Thankfully, ex-friend's departure didn't break the campaign campaign. Everyone wanted to continue if I was willing to, and because all the feedback I got from my skills as a DM was positive and constructive, I agreed to keep going with our original Band of Misfits. Overall, I do appreciate the support I got telling me I wasn't at fault in this situation, but even so, I do think there was more I could have done to try and mitigate the in-game issues ex-friend was causing. I feel like I could have been more assertive when out-of-character conversations happened, or put my foot down when ex-friend became more demanding about integrating backstory details that were a hard fit in the campaign I was running. So for anyone who has read from start to finish, I'll let you guys be the judge if I was lacking assertion when it mattered, or if I'm being too hard on myself. In any case, something I decide to do in the future is let new prospective players sit in for a session to get a feel for the tone of the campaign, and see if they would be interested in playing. I think this could be a good way to let players get a feel for the player's collective play style, and give them an idea on what kind of character they would like to play if they choose to participate, if and when the time comes for me to test that new system. I will let you guys know how it goes in a new post. For now, I look forward to when I get to DM again for my brother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. It's very rare that a problem just randomly resolves like this. You really lucked out as the author here. I'm not surprised at all by the fact that they were annoying for the same reasons out of game as they were in game. It seems like they really don't value anyone's time besides themselves. You had someone that was literally recovering from a surgery, and she seemed to make it about herself. That's honestly all I need to hear to be convinced that this player was not a good fit for your campaign. Yeah, sure, you could have incorporated their backstory a little bit better, but really in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't matter. I don't really like having big backstories for my campaigns either, because truthfully, if you're playing from a low level, a lot of the story should be in front of you and not behind you. A level 1 character is like a local legend at best. They probably didn't defeat a really strong monster, they probably haven't been a veteran fighter for several years. They're likely just someone who did something impressive once, and now they realize that maybe adventuring's right for them. Sometimes you can have a backstory that's more about your lineage, you know, you come from a certain bloodline, that's how you got your powers, maybe someone's a noble in your family. A lot of that stuff is common in fantasy, but if you want that to be the focus of the campaign, it comes off as a little self-centered. No one should be using their backstory to make themselves more important than the rest of the party. If you want to be important, do important stuff in the game. So I'd say next time you can push back on that a lot more, but don't feel too bad that you didn't do it this time. Everyone has to start somewhere as a dungeon master. You already have 3 players that are having a ton of fun at the game table. You've already succeeded at the hard part, so I wouldn't beat yourself up too much. But I want to pass it on to the audience. Do you understand where the dungeon master was coming from, or were they way too passive in the situation? I always love reading your comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and hype the video as it really helps the channel grow, and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell for now.